Did you know that there's a character in the Harry Potter universe who managed to be more hated than Voldemort himself? A witch who made millions of fans around the world feel more anger toward her than toward the Dark Lord in person. Today, we're going to dive into the complete history of Dolores Jane Umbridge, the woman who transformed Hogwarts into a true pink nightmare. Get ready to learn every dark detail about the witch who wore decorative kittens while torturing students, who smiled sweetly while destroying lives, and who proved that not all evil comes dressed in black. This is a story that will make your blood boil, but I guarantee you won't be able to stop watching until the end. Before we begin this journey through the most disturbing side of the Ministry of Magic, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, take this opportunity to subscribe now and activate the bell. Your subscription makes all the difference for us to continue bringing quality content about the universe we love. Let's together unravel all the secrets behind that irritating little laugh that still haunts our nightmares. Dolores Jane Umbridge was born on August 26th, although the exact year is a mystery that she herself made sure to hide throughout her life. Daughter of Orford Umbridge, a janitor in the magical maintenance department of the Ministry of Magic, and Ellen Cracknell, a muggle, Dolores grew up in a family she considered deeply shameful. Her father held one of the lowest possible positions in the ministry, something that would deeply mark her psyche and feed her sick obsession with power and social status. Dolores's childhood was marked by a profound shame of her origins. Her mother, Ellen, was a muggle woman who married Orford without knowing he was a wizard until the birth of their children. When Dolores manifested her magical powers, followed by her younger brother Aquilus, who was born a squib, Ellen entered a state of shock and deep depression. The discovery that her children were wizards and that her husband had lied for years about his true nature destroyed the marriage. Ellen eventually abandoned the family, taking Aquilus with her back to the Muggle world, leaving Dolores alone with her father. This maternal abandonment created in Dolores a deep hatred for Muggles that would accompany her throughout her life. She never got over the fact that her mother had chosen her brother instead of her, the talented witch daughter. This rejection planted the seeds of the virulent prejudice that would later transform her into one of the cruelest figures in the wizarding world. Dolores learned from an early age to hide her true origins, creating a false persona of a pure-blood witch that she would maintain meticulously throughout her career. At age 11, Dolores received her Hogwarts letter, a moment she had been anxiously awaiting as her chance to escape the mediocre life she shared with her father. She was selected for Slytherin, the house known for valuing ambition and cunning, characteristics that Dolores possessed in abundance. During her years at Hogwarts, she did not stand out academically or socially. She was an average student with no exceptional talents in any specific discipline, but she compensated for her lack of brilliance with fierce determination and an impressive ability to flatter teachers and authority figures. At Hogwarts, Dolores developed her most notable skills: the ability to manipulate bureaucratic systems and the art of political survival. She carefully observed the power dynamics within the school, learning who had influence and how to approach these people. She made no true friendships, seeing other students as potential stepping stones for her future ascent or as obstacles to be removed. Her ordinary appearance and apparently harmless behavior made her easily forgettable, a characteristic she learned to use to her advantage. During her school years, Dolores also developed her peculiar obsession with cats and the color pink. Cats, in her distorted mind, represented a form of companionship that would not judge her for her origins or her lack of personal charm. The color pink became her trademark, a calculated attempt to appear feminine, delicate and harmless, masking her true, cruel nature. This dichotomy between sugary appearance and poisonous personality would become her signature throughout her life. After graduating from Hogwarts at 17, Dolores immediately began working at the Ministry of Magic, determined to climb the hierarchy as quickly as possible. She started as a simple junior assistant in the improper use of magic office, a humble position that constantly reminded her of her father, still working as a janitor on the lower floors of the same building. This proximity to her humble origins only intensified her determination to ascend rapidly. Dolores proved to be exceptionally skilled at navigating ministerial bureaucracy. She had a special talent for identifying the weaknesses and insecurities of her superiors, using this information to make herself indispensable. She shamelessly flattered those above her, while subtly sabotaging her colleagues, whom she saw as competition. Her favorite strategy was to spread carefully calculated rumors that destroyed reputations while keeping her own hands apparently clean. One of Dolores's first significant acts of cruelty at the ministry was forcing her own father into early retirement. When she began gaining influence, she became terrified at the possibility of someone discovering that the humble janitor Orford Umbridge was her father. Using her growing influence, she orchestrated a series of incidents that made her father appear incompetent, forcing him to accept early retirement with a small pension. To ensure his silence, she paid him an additional amount every month on the condition that he never revealed their relationship. During her first years at the ministry, Dolores developed a reputation as someone who could get things done, no matter how unpleasant the tasks. She volunteered for jobs that others avoided, especially those that involved pursuing and punishing offenders. She discovered that she had a natural talent for interrogations and that she felt a disturbing pleasure in exercising power over others. This combination of bureaucratic efficiency and casual cruelty made her a valuable tool for less scrupulous superiors. Dolores's rise through the ministry departments was methodical and calculated. She passed through the improper use of magic office, then through the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, always leaving a trail of destroyed colleagues and superiors enchanted with her apparent dedication. In each position, she implemented increasingly restrictive regulations, always under the pretext of maintaining order and protecting wizarding society. Her specialty was creating rules that seemed reasonable on the surface, but in practice were instruments of oppression. It was during her time at the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures that Dolores began to publicly show her prejudice against non-fully human creatures. She drafted restrictive legislation against werewolves, preventing them from obtaining meaningful employment. Her anti-werewolf legislation was so draconian that it condemned entire generations of werewolves to poverty and marginalization. When questioned about the severity of these laws, she responded with her characteristic sugary smile that she was merely protecting innocent wizard children. Dolores's anti-werewolf legislation had devastating consequences that reverberated throughout the wizarding world. Werewolves, who previously managed to live relatively normal lives, maintaining jobs and contributing to society, were suddenly marginalized. Many lost their means of subsistence overnight. Families were destroyed when werewolf parents could no longer support their children. The number of werewolves living on the margins of society increased dramatically, creating exactly the kind of dangerous situation that Dolores claimed to be trying to prevent. The most tragic case was that of Remus Lupin, a brilliant and gentle man who could have contributed significantly to wizarding society, was forced to live in poverty and isolation because of Umbridge's laws. His inability to maintain stable employment was not due to his condition, but to the artificial legal barriers created by Dolores. This is just one example among hundreds of lives destroyed by her discriminatory legislation. But Dolores didn't stop with werewolves. She expanded her crusade to include centaurs, giants, goblins, and any creature she considered inferior. She proposed legislation to mark and track all magical creatures, essentially creating a registration system that disturbingly resembled totalitarian Muggle regimes. Her proposal to make centaurs wear identifying collars caused a diplomatic revolt that nearly resulted in open war between the Ministry and the centaur tribes of Great Britain. During this period, Dolores also began to carefully cultivate her public image. She presented herself as a defender of traditional wizarding values and the purity of magical society. She organized elaborate teas for the influential wives of ministry officials, where she spread her propaganda under the guise of polite conversation. At these gatherings, she planted seeds of fear and prejudice, always with her sweet smile and her honeyed voice, making it seem that her extremist ideas were just common sense. Dolores's ability to manipulate public opinion was masterful. She intuitively understood that fear was a powerful tool and used it without scruples. After any incident involving magical creatures, no matter how minor or isolated, she appeared in the newspapers clamoring for stricter measures and protection for our children. She transformed isolated incidents into existential crises, always positioning herself as the only voice of reason in a dangerous world. Her ascent continued when she was promoted to the position of Senior Undersecretary to the Minister of Magic, serving under Cornelius Fudge. This position placed her at the heart of political power in the wizarding world. Fudge, a weak and easily influenced man, became increasingly dependent on Dolores to handle the more unpleasant aspects of his government. She became his unofficial enforcer, the person who did the dirty work while Fudge kept his hands clean. It was in this position that Dolores fully developed her characteristic style of governance through bureaucratic terror. She created a complex web of regulations and procedures that made it impossible for anyone to challenge the ministry without finding themselves entangled in technical violations. A wizard could wake up in the morning and discover they had violated 3 obscure regulations before even having breakfast. This web of rules gave Dolores nearly unlimited power to persecute anyone she considered a threat or simply disliked. The true malignant genius of Dolores lay in her ability to make all this appear legal and appropriate. Each act of cruelty was wrapped in bureaucratic language and justified with references to obscure regulations. When she destroyed someone's life, she did it with a smile and a hem-hem, as if she were doing the person a favor. This combination of sadism and false courtesy made her particularly disturbing to her victims, who often didn't know how to react to someone who destroyed them while offering tea and biscuits. During her time as Senior Undersecretary, Dolores also began to build her own power base within the ministry. She identified ambitious but unscrupulous officials and brought them into her orbit, creating a network of informants and enforcers loyal only to her. These individuals, who became informally known as Umbridge's kittens due to her feline obsession, formed a parallel force within the ministry that answered directly to her, not to the minister. Cornelius Fudge's paranoia after Voldemort's return, which he refused to believe, gave Dolores even more power. Fudge, desperate to maintain the illusion that everything was fine, gave her carte blanche to silence anyone who contradicted the ministry's official narrative. Dolores embraced this task with disturbing enthusiasm, using all means at her disposal to discredit Harry Potter and Albus Dumbledore. It was during this period that Dolores developed a particular obsession with Harry Potter. For her, Harry represented everything she despised, someone who defied authority, who refused to bow to established power, and who had the audacity to contradict the ministry publicly. But more than that, Harry had something that Dolores would never have: people who genuinely cared about him. This deep envy fueled her hatred and led her to some of her cruelest acts. The year 1995 marked the height of Dolores Umbridge's power when she was appointed Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts. This appointment was no coincidence. It was a calculated political maneuver by Fudge to establish ministerial control over the school and, more importantly, to silence Dumbledore and Harry Potter. Dolores accepted the position with barely disguised pleasure, seeing it as her opportunity to mold the next generation of wizards according to her distorted vision. From her first day at Hogwarts, Dolores made it clear that she was not there to teach, but to indoctrinate. Her curriculum for defense against the dark arts was a complete farce, a purely theoretical course that taught no real defensive magic. When students protested that they needed to learn to defend themselves, especially with Voldemort's return, she responded with her condescending smile that there was no threat and that thinking otherwise was spreading malicious lies. Dolores's classroom quickly became an environment of oppression and fear. She instituted draconian rules about student behavior, severely punishing any sign of dissent. Students were forbidden from asking unauthorized questions, from contradicting the ministry-approved textbook material, or even from whispering to each other. Any violation resulted in detentions that she personally administered with evident sadistic pleasure. It was during these detentions that Dolores revealed the true depth of her cruelty. She used a special blood quill, an instrument of torture that forced students to write lines using their own blood as ink, carving the words into their hands. Harry Potter was subjected to this torture repeatedly, forced to write, "I must not tell lies," until the words were permanently scarred on his hand. The fact that she inflicted this torture on children while drinking tea and decorating her office with kitten plates demonstrated a profound psychological disconnect. But physical torture was only one part of Dolores's arsenal. She was a master of psychological torture, using public humiliation, isolation, and emotional manipulation to break students' spirits. She particularly enjoyed humiliating students in front of their peers, knowing that public shame was often more painful than any physical punishment. Students who dared to challenge her found their lives at Hogwarts transformed into constant nightmares. Educational Decree number 23 was Dolores's first step in consolidating her power at Hogwarts, giving her authority to create new rules and punishments. But it was her appointment as High Inquisitor of Hogwarts that truly revealed her totalitarian ambitions. With this new title, she gained power to inspect and dismiss other teachers, reform the curriculum, and essentially rule the school with an iron fist. As High Inquisitor, Dolores initiated a campaign of terror against the Hogwarts teachers. She conducted inspections that were actually public humiliation sessions, interrupting classes to question teachers' competence in front of students. Professor Trelawney was her first victim, cruelly dismissed and nearly expelled from the castle in a scene of calculated public humiliation. The sight of Sybil Trelawney crying in the entrance hall, surrounded by her trunks, while Dolores smiled with satisfaction, remains one of the most disturbing images of that terrible year. The attempt to dismiss Hagrid was even more violent. Dolores brought a squad of Aurors to arrest him at night, resulting in a battle that left Professor McGonagall severely injured. Dolores's reign of terror at Hogwarts intensified with the creation of the Inquisitorial Squad, a hand-picked group of students who were given power to police their peers. Composed mainly of Slytherin students who shared her prejudices, the squad became her personal police force within the school. These students had authority to deduct house points, give detentions, and spy on other students, creating an atmosphere of paranoia and distrust reminiscent of totalitarian regimes. The discovery of Dumbledore's army was the moment Dolores had been waiting for. Finally, she had proof that there was a conspiracy against the ministry. Her reaction was disproportionate and cruel. She was prepared to use the Cruciatus curse on Harry Potter to force him to reveal information. The fact that she was willing to use one of the unforgivable curses on a 15-year-old student shows that she had completely abandoned any pretense of legality or morality. Dolores's final confrontation at Hogwarts came when she attempted to arrest Hagrid and attacked McGonagall. Her willingness to use lethal force against members of the Hogwarts staff revealed that she had become completely unrestrained. It was only the intervention of the centaurs from the Forbidden Forest that finally stopped her reign of terror. The irony of being carried away by creatures she had spent her entire career persecuting and dehumanizing was not lost on anyone. The encounter with the centaurs left Dolores deeply traumatized. Although the exact details of what happened in the forest were never fully revealed, she spent weeks at St. Mungo's Hospital in a nearly catatonic state. When she finally regained the ability to speak, she demonstrated extreme terror at the sound of hooves or anything that reminded her of centaurs. This trauma, though not justifying her actions, showed that she was not invincible and that there were consequences for her cruelty. After her recovery, Dolores returned to the ministry, where she continued her career under the new regime. When Rufus Scrimgeour became minister, she maintained her position, adapting as she always did to political changes. Her ability to survive regime changes demonstrated her political skill and the usefulness of her authoritarian tendencies to any government that wanted to maintain tight control. But it was after the fall of the ministry to Voldemort that Dolores Umbridge showed her true nature. Under the regime of pious Thicknesser, controlled by Death Eaters, she flourished as never before. She was appointed head of the Muggle-born Registration Commission, a position that gave her power to persecute Muggle-born wizards under the false premise that they had stolen magic from true wizards. The Muggle-born Registration Commission was the height of Dolores's bureaucratic cruelty. She presided over sham trials where Muggle-born wizards were interrogated about how they acquired their magic wands. These trials were complete farces. Guilt was presumed, and the only possible outcome was condemnation. Dolores sent hundreds of innocent wizards to Azkaban, destroying families and lives with her signature and stamp. The most disturbing thing about this period is that Dolores was not a Death Eater. She did not have the Dark Mark, did not serve Voldemort out of ideology or fear. She collaborated voluntarily and enthusiastically with the regime because it gave her the power she had always desired. Absolute power to persecute those she considered inferior. While others collaborated out of fear or coercion, Dolores collaborated for pleasure. During the trials, Dolores wore Salazar Slytherin's locket, which she had confiscated from Mundungus Fletcher, without knowing its true nature as a Horcrux. She claimed that the ornate S represented the Selwyn family, lying about having pure blood to increase her status. The fact that she wore a piece of Voldemort's soul as decorative jewelry without even realizing it is deeply symbolic of her casual evil and ignorance. The courtroom where Dolores conducted her trials was a spectacle of bureaucratic horror. Dementors patrolled the space, sucking hope and happiness from the accused even before the trial began. Dolores, immune to the effects of the Dementors due to her lack of empathy and abundance of negative emotions, presided over these proceedings with evident pleasure. She took meticulous notes while destroying lives, always maintaining the facade of appropriate legal procedure. Dolores's victims during this period included not only Muggle-borns, but also their family members, and anyone who tried to protect them. Children were separated from parents, spouses were divided, and entire families disappeared into the prison system. She created a detailed file on every wizarding family in Great Britain, tracking lineages and looking for any evidence of impure blood that she could use for persecution. Mary Cattermole was one of Dolores's most well-known victims during this period. A Muggle-born witch who worked at the ministry, Mary was subjected to a humiliating trial where Dolores accused her of stealing magic. The sight of Mary, trembling with fear while Dolores smiled sweetly and condemned her, perfectly captured the perverse nature of these proceedings. It was only the intervention of Harry, Hermione and Ron, disguised with Polyjuice Potion, that saved Mary and others from being sent to Azkaban that day. The theft of Dolores's locket by Harry, Hermione and Ron during the Ministry infiltration was a significant blow, although she didn't know the true value of what she had lost. Her fury over the loss of the locket was not about its magical power, but about the status she believed it conferred upon her. She initiated a relentless hunt for the thieves, never suspecting that she had been robbed by Harry Potter himself. After Voldemort's fall at the Battle of Hogwarts, Dolores was one of the first to be arrested. Unlike many Death Eaters who claimed to be under the Imperious curse, Dolores had no such defense. Her actions were entirely voluntary, motivated not by fear or coercion, but by her own beliefs and ambitions. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Piles of documents signed by her condemning innocence, testimonies from dozens of victims, and the meticulous records she herself kept of her persecutions. Dolores Umbridge's trial was one of the most significant of the post-war period. She was charged with crimes against wizarding humanity, torture, persecution of Muggleborns, and collaboration with Voldemort's regime. During the trial, she maintained her facade of outraged innocence, claiming that she was merely following the law and maintaining order. Her inability to show any remorse or even acknowledge that she had done anything wrong shocked even the most experienced investigators. Witnesses lined up to testify against her. Students she had tortured at Hogwarts, Muggle-borns she had persecuted, families she had destroyed, all came to tell their stories. Harry Potter testified about the torture he suffered at her hands, showing the permanent scar on his hand that said, "I must not tell lies." Dolores Jane Umbridge was sentenced to life imprisonment in Azkaban for her crimes. The sentence was received with widespread relief by the wizarding community. Until the end, she maintained her facade of outraged indignation, never admitting guilt or showing remorse. When she was taken to Azkaban, her last recorded words were an indignant "hem hem" and a complaint that her pink robes were being wrinkled by the guards. In Azkaban, Dolores finally experienced the kind of helplessness and despair she had inflicted on so many others. Without the Dementors, who had been removed after the war, Azkaban was still a place of isolation and despair. Dolores, who had spent her life building networks of power and influence, found herself completely alone. The guards, many of whom had friends or family members who had been her victims, ensured that she received exactly the same treatment as any other prisoner. No more, no less, which for someone who always considered herself special was a torture in itself. Reports from Azkaban in the following years suggest that Dolores never accepted her situation. She continued to write memos and decrees that no one read, still trying to exercise an authority she no longer possessed. She decorated her cell with drawings of kittens made from improvised materials and continued to wear any pink fabric she could find. This refusal to accept reality, which had been a tool of oppression when she had power, became a form of self-torture in her confinement. Dolores Umbridge's legacy in the wizarding world is complex and disturbing. On the one hand, her actions led to significant reforms in the Ministry of Magic. Laws were passed limiting the power of individual officials. Protections were established for magical creatures and Muggle-borns, and an oversight system was created to prevent future abuses of power. The Umbridge Decree, as it became informally known, made the use of physical punishments in magical educational institutions illegal. On the other hand, Dolores demonstrated how easily democratic systems can be corrupted from within. She never needed dark magic or supernatural power, just bureaucracy, institutionalized prejudice, and the complacency of those around her. Her rise to power was facilitated by people who knew her actions were wrong, but chose not to act, whether out of fear, their own ambition, or simple indifference. Dolores's case also raised uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil. Unlike Voldemort, who was clearly evil and proud of it, Dolores always saw herself as good, just, and right. She genuinely believed that her actions were for the greater good, that the people she persecuted deserved their fate, and that she was protecting society. This ability to commit atrocities while remaining convinced of her own moral righteousness made her in many ways more dangerous than Voldemort. Harry Potter, her most famous victim, carried the physical scar of "I must not tell lies" for the rest of his life. In later interviews, he described how Dolores' psychological torture was in many ways worse than facing Voldemort. "With Voldemort," Harry said, "at least you knew where you stood. He was evil and didn't pretend otherwise. With Dolores, cruelty came disguised as moral correctness, making it more insidious and difficult to combat. Dolores' obsession with cats also became an object of study. Magical psychologists theorized that her preference for cats over people reflected her inability to form genuine human connections. Cats, in her mind, were controllable and predictable in a way that people were not. Her collection of decorative plates with kittens represented an idealized and sanitized version of companionship that she could completely control, unlike the messy and unpredictable human relationships that she was incapable of navigating. Dolores' use of the color pink was similarly analyzed as a psychological manipulation tool. By presenting herself in colors traditionally associated with femininity, softness, and innocence, she created cognitive dissonance in her victims. The human mind struggles to reconcile extreme cruelty with such a harmless presentation, often leading victims to question their own perceptions and experiences. This was a subtle but effective form of institutional gaslighting. The blood quills used by Dolores became a particular symbol of her cruelty. After her arrest, a campaign was launched to locate and destroy all existing blood quills. It was discovered that Dolores had commissioned dozens of them, distributing them to her allies at the Ministry. The public destruction of these quills became a cathartic event for many of her victims. Harry Potter personally destroyed the quill that had been used on him, describing the act as finally closing a painful chapter. Dolores' fall also exposed a network of collaborators who had facilitated her actions. Many ministry officials who had executed her orders without question faced their own consequences. Some were arrested, others lost their jobs, and many struggled with guilt for the rest of their lives. The case raised important questions about responsibility and the defense of just following orders. Precedent was established that following illegal or immoral orders was not a defense for participation in crimes against wizarding humanity. In the final documented years of her life in Azkaban, reports suggest that Dolores began to show signs of mental deterioration. She was frequently found talking to imaginary kitten plates, conducting trials of other prisoners who existed only in her mind, and writing decrees on the walls of her cell with whatever material she could find. Some saw this as poetic justice. The woman who had weaponized the sanity of the legal system now lost in her own fantasies of power. But even in her deterioration, Dolores never showed remorse. Until the end, she maintained that she had been a loyal servant of the wizarding world, persecuted for doing what was necessary. In one of her last coherent interviews, she declared that history would vindicate her, that future generations would understand that she was trying to protect the purity and order of the wizarding world. This inability to recognize the evil of her actions, even in the face of overwhelming evidence and universal condemnation, remains one of the most disturbing aspects of her personality. The death of Dolores Jane Umbridge in Azkaban passed almost unnoticed. She died alone, without friends or family to mourn her passing. Her funeral was attended only by prison officials fulfilling their duty. There were no eulogies, no tears, only the bureaucratic burial of someone who had transformed bureaucracy into a weapon. Her gravestone bears only her name and dates, no epitaph, no message of love or remembrance, just the cold record of an existence that brought suffering to so many, Dolores Umbridge's final legacy is one of warning. She demonstrates how seemingly ordinary people, without exceptional magical powers or particular charisma, can inflict tremendous evil when given authority and left unchecked. She shows how institutionalized prejudice, combined with personal ambition and lack of empathy, can create monsters that are even more dangerous for their banal appearance. She reminds us that evil doesn't always come in obviously threatening forms. Sometimes it wears pink, offers tea, and destroys lives with a smile and a hem-hem. The wizarding world learned many painful lessons from Dolores Umbridge. It learned that giving individuals power without oversight is dangerous, that institutionalized prejudice can be weaponized, and that the complacency of good people can allow bad people to flourish. It learned that torture can come disguised as discipline, that oppression can be called order, and that the worst atrocities can be committed by people who genuinely believe they are doing good. Today, the name Dolores Umbridge has become synonymous with bureaucratic abuse of power in the wizarding world. "Don't be an Umbridge" has become a common warning phrase in government circles. Her portrait is not hung in any hall of honor. Her contributions to magical law have all been repealed or reformed, and her attempt to leave a legacy of power and control resulted only in infamy and universal contempt. But perhaps the true legacy of Dolores Umbridge is the vigilance she inspired. Every time a government official tries to exceed their authority, every time someone proposes discriminatory laws, every time a teacher abuses their power over students, the specter of Dolores Umbridge is invoked as a warning. She has become the definitive example of what happens when we allow hatred and authoritarianism to disguise themselves as law and order. Dolores's victims, many of whom went on to have notable careers in the wizarding world, frequently speak about how their experiences with her made them stronger, more compassionate, and more determined to fight against injustice. Harry Potter, in particular, credited his determination to become an Auror and reform the department in part to his desire to ensure that no one like Dolores could again use law enforcement structures for persecution. The fact that Dolores never expressed genuine remorse raised philosophical questions about the nature of evil and the possibility of redemption. Some argued that her inability to recognize the evil of her actions suggested a form of moral insanity, while others maintained that she was fully aware of her choices but simply didn't care about the suffering she caused. This debate continues to inform discussions about criminal justice and rehabilitation in the wizarding world. The Umbridge laugh, that characteristic hem-hem that preceded her cruelest pronouncements, became so infamous that some survivors still experience trauma reactions when hearing similar sounds decades later. Therapists specializing in Umbridge-related trauma develop specific techniques to help victims overcome these triggers, including gradual exposure therapy and magical grounding techniques. Dolores's role in normalizing cruelty through bureaucratic language had lasting implications for how government documents are written in the wizarding world. New guidelines require clear and direct language in all official communications, specifically to prevent the kind of obfuscation that Dolores used to mask her true intentions. Each law must now include a clear statement of its purpose and potential impact in terms that any wizard or witch can understand. The theory that the Horcrux locket of Salazar Slytherin amplified Dolores's malignant tendencies was extensively debated. While some argued that the Horcrux influenced her, the consensus among experts is that she was already fully capable of extreme cruelty before acquiring the locket. The Horcrux may have amplified her worst qualities, but it didn't create them. Her actions before and after possessing the locket show consistency in cruelty that cannot be attributed solely to the influence of dark magic. This is the complete story of Dolores Jane Umbridge, from her humble origins to her infamous fall. A story that reminds us that the most dangerous monsters are not always those with supernatural powers or terrifying appearance. Sometimes they wear pink, smile sweetly, and destroy lives with nothing more than a quill, a stamp, and the authority we allow them to have. The final lesson of Dolores Umbridge is not just about her as an individual, but about the conditions that allowed her to flourish. It's about the importance of constant vigilance against authoritarianism, the need to protect the vulnerable, and the danger of remaining silent in the face of injustice. Her story is a reminder that evil often comes not with thunder and fury, but with paperwork and procedure, and that the defense of freedom and justice requires constant courage from ordinary people willing to say no to power when it exceeds its limits. May the memory of Dolores Umbridge's victims be a blessing, and may her story serve as an eternal warning that we must never allow hatred and cruelty to disguise themselves as law and order again. The price of freedom, as they say, is eternal vigilance, and the story of Dolores Jane Umbridge is the clearest proof of why that vigilance is so necessary. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching this complete story. If this content was valuable to you, leave your like, share with other Harry Potter fans, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Comment which character you'd like to see in a deep analysis like this one. Until the next video.